We begin in Havana, where Cuba's president, Miguel Diaz Canel, sat down for an exclusive interview with teleSUR president, Patricia Villegas. Diaz Canel laments the numerous challenges facing the island nation, most importantly, the U.S.-imposed blockade.
I think the U.S.-imposed blockade is the main obstacle to the country's development, and it affects the lives of Cubans and the economy. It's a brutal measure. I would even describe it as an inhumane practice against the people condemned to suffer and die. They impose extraterritorial laws against Cuba and frustrate relations between Cuba and the rest of the world. It has become increasingly difficult. There is also persistent financial persecution because there are significant limitations on the flow of money and, by extension, investment. There is something that has been orchestrated by the U.S. government, a blockade that's already 60 years old.
But despite the obstacles, Diaz Canel says the Cuban people remain resilient. He also stresses the importance of engaging with the younger generation in revolutionary Cuba.
Is it a concern for you to be able to communicate with the younger people in Cuban society?
I think it's necessary for the revolution. Fidel strongly believed in it. He went to universities when he wanted to discuss a problem. He had famous encounters at the Cadenas Plaza at the Havana University during the early years of the revolution. For me, it has been necessary. Since I was a youth leader and when I was a party secretary in 2 provinces and when I was Minister of Higher Education, that need to talk to the youth that have so much to contribute and they always freshen up. To know about their aspirations and their willingness to participate and propose things, that communication is a 3rd pillar that should be a part of the new figures. The 4th pillar is that those of us in leadership should know that the answers to our problems are very complex. So we can't talk about one alternative, we always have to find several alternative solutions. Fidel also subscribed to that concept, and the only way to be more effective is to turn to scientific research and innovation, because many times we invest but don't nail it down. And that, used as a tool to solve problems, can be used by all leaders to defend their actions. Some will say, well, my generation was born during the first years of the revolution. Our children, our grandchildren, these are generations which have been born under the blockade. I think we must also recognize the heroism of such a small island nation, blockaded, not just by anyone, but by the most powerful country on the planet. Yet, it is still capable of resisting and building its own emancipatory platform. I believe this is not just an expression of resistance, but of victory.
Now to Peru, where during an address to the nation, President Martin Vizcarra called for a special session of Congress to approve a referendum for political and judicial reform. If it doesn't get the nod, Vizcarra says he is prepared to dissolve Congress.
I want to say to all Peruvians that I am not deaf to your outrage. I have made it my own and I share it. I have taken up the public's calls for reform now, for an end to the sale of rights, to impunity in our legal system and to the sickness in our society. 40 days ago, we submitted to Congress 4 proposals for constitutional reform, with the expectation that we and Congress would work and fight together against this epidemic. However, during this time, Congress has not shared the concerns Peruvians who are outraged. They have rejected the urgency of these changes.
We have more from Jaime Herrera in Lima.
In an
address to the nation on Sunday evening, President Martin Vizcarra announced that he has summoned both houses of Congress to a special session on Wednesday, with the aim of legislating constitutional reform against corruption. If they block it into a no-confidence vote, Vizcarra says he will then be empowered by Peru's constitution to dissolve Congress. The president is aiming to push Congress into a corner. On Monday, lawmakers from either side of the aisle will meet with parliamentary spokespersons from various parties for the purpose of organizing the special session. This reform debate is quite a complicated situation for this Andean country and has put the Peruvian president on a coalition course with Congress.
The leader of the Olivier Sinistera Front armed group has been wounded during a military operation in Colombia. According to authorities, Walter Artizala, also known as Waucho, was shot in Tumaco, which is close to the Ecuadorian border. The group is believed to be responsible for the kidnap and murders of 5 Ecuadorian citizens.
We have received information about an operation from our special forces, an operation carried out by the military and police that Guacho was injured. At the moment, the military and police are closing in on an area where he was injured as so to find him.
The Ecuadorian government has released a statement confirming what Colombian authorities have said. Ecuador says Guacho was seriously injured. He was shot twice in the back, yet despite this, he managed to escape. Trade unions in Costa Rica say they'll continue their open-ended strike against the government's fiscal reform plan. They have rejected the talks proposed by the Catholic Church, and the government says they won't talk until the strike is called off. Monday is the 8th consecutive day of protest action.
Costa Rica se mantiene con el movimiento de huelga iniciado este 10 de septiembre.
An indefinite strike this Monday will be 8th contest date of contest protests. This Sunday there have been several blockades on roads in the country. This Monday, schools will have little assistance. Up to 80% of teachers plan to participate in the strike. Concentrations of people present in the country's main gas distributors have been maintained. Meanwhile, the talks in the parliament continue between various proposals. Both sides negotiate, but have not yet reached an agreement.
We thank Fernando Francia for that, and we'll take a short break now. We have more news in a minute.
So yeah, national security is one of the most powerful notions in modern times. To swindle, I think, people, to do things that are not in their best interest, and to support massive military complexes that are not in anybody's interest, but that are like cancers feeding on society.
Watch a series where the U.S. geopolitical strategies as an empire representing the culture of war and propaganda are shown, and how this has served as a tool of social control. War. Saturday. Only on teleSUR.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along and find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives. Saturdays, only on teleSUR.
Welcome back. Mexico's president-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador is promising to roll out social programs for the elderly and indigenous peoples. AMLO is also assuring that he has students' best interests at heart. Credit schemes to promote economic development are also high on his priority list. He was speaking at a meeting in Nayarit State during Independence Day celebrations.
There are going to be changes. There will be changes. And look, I will not disappoint you. I will not. And anytime there is a difficult situation, I will be present and I will talk to you. I'm sure you will understand me because I will never ever make a decision that negatively affects the people of Mexico. Never ever. I will always act in good faith and with justice. We must all seek the transformation of the country.
Enrique Peña Nieto has presided over his last military parade in Mexico. However, it comes at a time when there are questions about the role the armed forces are playing in domestic security.
In the biggest military parade in Mexico, the Army, Marines and Air Forces present their arms to the president and citizens who attend the parade in the center of the capital. But it's not all cheers. The use of the armed forces has been questioned all the way back to the days when former President Felipe Calderón ordered the soldiers to start the war against narcos, a war which has left more than 170,000 dead.
The army is affected to some extent by the same thing. The entire country is affected by corruption.
I don't think the army has to assume security functions. It should help the population and obviously, in case there is a war.
After 11 years patrolling almost all states of the country, neither Calderón nor Enrique Peña Nieto pulled the military from domestic security functions.
The problem is that if the army is still assuming security functions, the police will never be trained. All politicians know how to solve it, but it is difficult for them to solve it politically.
Civil society organisations look to the new government to change this national security strategy. Critics say it is giving impunity to army forces to violate human rights.
Morena has always been on the side of fighting security without war. He has asked for the constitution to be applied.
The president-elect has said the army and the Marines will continue as normal for now. The Secretary of National Security says it is a temporary measure until forces are regularized.
Residents of a building that collapsed during last year's earthquake in Mexico are still struggling a year on. In Mexico City, people are living in makeshift tents after a 7.1 magnitude earthquake flattened their building. There's still no solution to their housing crisis. More than 350 people died in that quake. The Lula Libre Festival, or the Free Lula Festival, took place Sunday in Sao Paulo to condemn the imprisonment of the former president, Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva. It's the second edition of the festival, which took place in the heart of the city. Social activists demanded the release of the former president as they warned it puts Brazil's democracy at risk. Lula supporters also claim there is political interference within the judicial system.
Now is the time for Sao Paulo to show art and culture through the politics, to tell the Brazilian society that Lula continues to be our president. He represents the Brazilian government, and all through they removed him from the elections. Haddad is Lula and Lula is Haddad.
This event shows that Lula's freedom is necessary. It's important to return to democracy, which was massacred after the coup against Dilma Rousseff. And she didn't commit a crime. Former President Lula also didn't commit a crime. There is not a proof against him. He's a political prisoner in our country.
Lula's successor and current Workers' Party presidential candidate, Fernando Haddad, has vowed to put an end to the neoliberal policies promoted by the current government. He made the announcement while on the campaign trail. Haddad visited the eastern state of Bahia, along with his vice presidential running mate, Manuela de Aviela. And now we turn to Ignacio Limas for this update from the campaign trail.
Sao Paulo has taken its turn in hosting the Lula Libre Festival on Paulista Avenue, where thousands gathered and singers and dancers performed. The festival also took place in Rio de Janeiro with the presence of known artists such as Gilberto Gil and Chico Buarque, and also in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Social and political movements set up a stage, including the Brazil Popular Front and the Workers' Party. to demand the freedom of Lula da Silva after being detained for the past 5 months in the federal police headquarters in Curitiba. This festival was held after the attack on the candidate Jair Bolsonaro, and several fascist threats against members of left-wing parties and events were carried out peacefully. The presidential candidate for the Workers' Party, Fernando Haddad, walked from the Art Museum of Sao Paulo through the Paulista Avenue, and he demanded Lula's freedom. This comes at a critical political time in Brazil.
Meanwhile, speaking from his hospital bed, Brazilian presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro warns of possible fraud during the October 7th polls.
The narrative now is that I will lose against anyone in the second round. The big concern isn't really to lose in the vote, it is losing because of fraud. This possibility of fraud in the second round, even in the first, is concrete.
A new group of Venezuelans has returned home as part of the government's Return to the Homeland plan. They were the latest group to leave Ecuador. More in this report.
After 3 hours of flight from Ecuador, they finally arrived home. They arrived to Venezuela. Each one of them has a story. They are the faces of a supposed humanitarian crisis, an excuse the Organization of American States has used to promote intervention attempts in the country.
Almagro should feel ashamed. A flight with 92 people is returning. He has caused so much harm.
Luis Almagro, Secretary General of the Organization of American States, promoted intervention plans from the border with Colombia. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez denounced his statement. The migrants joined her.
Yesterday we saw Almagro talking about Venezuela from Colombia, precisely the country with more migration, more inequality, deaths, and the highest drug production. He talked about Venezuela instead of commenting about Colombia's internal issues. There are political interests promoted by the U.S. Almagro has become a tool for them.
They are not refugees, they are economic migrants. The young people who have returned have another vision. They came back to start all over again.
I realized that I have more opportunities here. Minimum wages are the same as in Venezuela. It's not worth it. It's surviving.
A team from the Foreign Ministry and other authorities have explained how they can be included in social programs.
We know the hard circumstances that you had to face. The government will guide you and help you benefit from the Return to Your Homeland program.
They are not migrants anymore. A new chapter in Venezuela awaits for them.
In Haiti, the announcement of a new cabinet has fueled riots in the capital. Fiery demonstrations erupted in Port-au-Prince on Sunday following the ratification of Jean-Henri Séant as prime minister. Protesters burned tires, blocked major roads and vandalized properties. Special forces had to be called out to quell escalating tensions. Earlier, the Jean-Henri Séant government won 84 votes in favor, 5 against and 4 abstentions. On Twitter, he asked Haitians to join forces for the happiness of the country. The Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, will visit Guyana on Wednesday to sign a memorandum of understanding on energy cooperation. The MOU is controversial partially because Guyana's private sector has warned the government against entering any arrangement that could be disadvantageous to local business, especially as Guyana's energy industry is rapidly developing. Time now for the second break of the newscast. World News is next.
Queremos verdad, reparación integral, pero sobre todo justicia, pero justicia social.
How many ways there are to tell a story? The different perspectives of our nations are on teleSUR documentaries. Sundays, only on teleSUR. teleSUR brings you special interviews with social and political personalities. Monday, from Washington. Tuesday, from Mexico. Wednesday, from Caracas. Thursday, from Quito. Friday, from Havana. Analysis about our continent's reality. Weekdays, only on teleSUR.
Welcome back. At least 18 people have died after Florence battered North Carolina in the United States. The storm has now been downgraded to a tropical depression, but more flooding is expected. Florence is producing heavy rains, flash flooding, and major river flooding in the Carolinas. More than 900 people have been rescued from rising floodwaters.
Floodwaters are still raging across parts of our state, and the risk to life is rising with the angry waters. We have about 15,000 people or more, that number's fluid, remaining in about 150 shelters across the state. Mass shelters are open in Winston-Salem and Chapel Hill, and additional shelters will be open if necessary. Across the state, around 700,000 people right now are without power.
Our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Gestoso, is also bracing for the impacts of the storm.
This morning, the remains of Florence tropical storm are arriving in Washington in the northern part of US. It devastated North Carolina when it passed over, leaving at least 18 dead. There are nearly 1 million homes without electricity. Rain is not a problem anymore, but the flooding, which authorities have called catastrophic. There have been hundreds of places buried, flooded and blocked off. Rivers overflowed, so we'll still wait to see what it brings to Washington and what its passage will bring to other places such as New York.
Hurricane Florence sweeping through the Carolinas has been called a form of punishment by the Nation of Islam. Here's more on that and a look at some of today's other stories.
The leader of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan, said Typhoon Florence is a punishment for the sins of the United States. Speaking at the 23rd anniversary of the Million Man March, Farrakhan also stated that the presidency of Donald Trump has been inflicted on the country for its racial injustices.
God brought the ginger man. To the White House. Because, now listen carefully now, America has to pay for the sins that she has committed. The genocide of the native people, the transatlantic slave trade that brought us here, the lynchings, the brutality, the killing of us without any thought of justice coming to us. Do you think that God is pleased?
Hundreds of protesters marched through the streets of Tripoli in Libya on Sunday. Demonstrators demanded that the president and several officials step down amid poor living standards. They're upset about the high prices and lack of available cash. 2 people died when a boat carrying migrants sank off the coast of Turkey. Turkish authorities confirmed that 16 people have been rescued and the search for a missing woman continues.
And Kenya's Olympic marathon champion Eliud Kipchoge has shattered the marathon world record in Berlin. The super athlete crossed the finish line in 2 hours, 1 minute and 39 seconds. Kipchoge took nearly 1 minute and 20 seconds off his previous best, set by his compatriot Dennis Kimeto. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For teleSUR English, I'm Sonia Gray. Thank you for watching.
teleSUR brings you a special interview.